This episode contains mature themes. AI technology is used to enhance the listening experience. Listener discretion is advised. The Peruvian desert is a quiet place. Too quiet. For more than 1,000 years, the wind has swept across its barren plains, revealing nothing, protecting everything. But from above, the emptiness breaks. Perfect lines cut across the earth with impossible precision, forming shapes no one on the ground could ever recognize. A spider, a hummingbird, a pair of long, reaching hands. They stretch for miles, carved by people whose faces we'll never see, and for reasons they never wrote down. And whatever they meant to warn us about, it's still waiting out there. Welcome to Three Theories, the podcast where we uncover the great mysteries of the world. I'm Elena Hart, your guide on this journey through the unknown. Each episode will examine unsolved cases, paranormal phenomena, and historical and natural mysteries, and explore three compelling theories to help you decide, what do you believe? The Nazca Desert sits along the southern coast of Peru, a place where the sun burns through the horizon day after day, and rain is almost a myth. It's a land of quiet horizons, where the days feel still and the nights fall fast and cold. For centuries, travelers crossed the open plains without noticing anything beneath their feet. They followed the ridgelines, camped in the dust, and left no record of the ground beneath them. A ground that held drawings too massive to be understood from the earth. The stillness of the region kept its secret intact, protected by heat, distance, and the sheer monotony of the landscape. The first outsiders to truly realize what lay out there arrived in the 1920s, when commercial pilots began flying routes across southern Peru. They expected to see sand, rock, maybe a few scattered settlements. Instead, they looked down and saw lines, straight, geometric, stretching in every direction. One pilot later described the site as roads leading to nowhere. But they weren't roads. They were carved shapes, enormous and deliberate. Triangles, spirals, and animal figures whose outlines could only be seen from hundreds of feet in the air. The scale was breathtaking. A single figure, the condor, measured more than 400 feet long from wingtip to wingtip. The pilots circled back again and again, trying to understand what they were seeing, stunned that so much had been hiding in plain sight. None of this was visible from the ground. On the desert floor, a person could walk across the lines without realizing they were part of something larger. The soil offered no vantage point. The shapes were too big, the angles too wide. From the ground, the lines were silent. From above, they were unmistakable. The difference between the two perspectives only deepened the mystery. The designs were created for someone who could see the desert from the sky. Archaeologists eventually determined that the Nazca culture, a civilization that flourished between 200 BCE and 600 CE, likely created the geoglyphs. Their pottery, textiles, and burial sites were found nearby. They were skilled artisans, farmers, and builders. They understood irrigation and engineered aqueducts that still function today. But none of their surviving artifacts, not one, explains the lines. Their tools, their artwork, their structures. Nothing references the enormous shapes they carved into the desert, as if the most extraordinary achievement of their civilization wasn't something they needed to describe. Standing in the desert today, the air feels strangely heavy around them. The ground is dark, coated in a layer of iron oxide pebbles that have baked in the sun for centuries. The Nazca people scraped these stones aside to reveal the pale sand underneath, leaving shallow trenches that have survived for nearly 2,000 years. No walls, no fences, no monuments, just enormous shapes made by removing a few inches of soil. The simplicity of the method only makes the result harder to comprehend. The persistence of the lines is part of the mystery. They should have eroded long ago. But the desert is stable. No rain, almost no wind. It's as if something wanted them preserved. The climate has acted like a natural vault, locking the shapes into place for millennia, far longer than any stone monument or wooden structure could survive in other parts of the world. The designs fall into categories: geometric lines, biomorphic figures, and sprawling trapezoids aligned with precise angles. Some point toward distant mountains, some align with solstices. Others seem to mark underground aquifers. But the deeper archaeologists dig, the stranger it gets. The combinations of alignments, symbols, and pathways don't form a coherent system, at least not one that makes sense to us now. The figures, the monkey with its spiraling tail, the enormous hummingbird, the wide-eyed humanoid with one raised arm, appear almost playful at first glance. Up close, they feel different. Their edges are too clean, their designs too intentional. Some appear carved in a single continuous motion, as though the creators knew exactly what the final form would be before the first stone was moved. Their precision suggests planning, coordination, and a purpose that has never been fully explained. And then there are the walkways, long, straight paths that stretch for miles, serving no clear purpose. They don't connect settlements. They don't point toward known shrines. Some run directly into mountain faces, as if meant to continue upward. A few fork suddenly, and then disappear into featureless desert. They behave like roads, but lead nowhere that makes sense. Researchers studying the lines often describe a persistent feeling, something subtle, like being watched. The desert is empty, of course. Nothing moves out there except heat, wind, and the occasional scavenger bird. Yet when workers stand inside the designs, the silence feels unnaturally deep, like the earth itself is listening. Even seasoned archaeologists admit that there's a sense of presence out there, something that doesn't quite match the stillness of the landscape. In aerial photographs, the lines look intentional, intelligent, unfinished even, as if a final message is missing or obscured, something meant to tie it all together, something that was lost. The gaps between the figures and the geometric patterns raise questions about whether parts of the desert once held shapes that have since vanished, or whether the lines were only one piece of a larger system. The Nazca themselves left few clues. Their decline came suddenly, likely from environmental collapse, drought, or social upheaval. But in their final years, they began creating even more lines, larger and more abstract than ever before. Some archaeologists believe these late-stage geoglyphs were desperate pleas to deities. Others say the patterns don't match any known ritual system. They appear chaotic, rushed, like warnings carved into the earth by people who knew they were running out of time. The sudden shift in scale and precision suggests something changed, something that frightened them. To this day, the Nazca Lines remain the largest collection of unexplained geoglyphs on Earth. They were designed for eyes in the sky long before humans could fly. And if the original audience wasn't human, then the mystery is a lot older than the Nazca culture itself. Theories try to answer those questions, but none of them settle the unease that lingers over the desert. The sense that whatever message was left out there, it was meant for someone who hasn't arrived yet. The most widely accepted explanation among archaeologists is that the Nazca Lines were created as ceremonial offerings to their gods, especially deities associated with water and fertility. The Nazca lived in one of the driest regions on Earth. Their survival depended on successful agriculture, and their irrigation systems required constant maintenance. A single season of drought could devastate an entire generation. In a landscape where the horizon shimmered with heat and the ground cracked under the weight of each passing summer, the relationship between the Nazca and their gods wasn't symbolic. It was immediate, practical, and essential. In this environment, rituals weren't just spiritual practices. They were acts of survival. Many scholars believe the lines were part of these rituals, processional pathways designed for ceremonies, prayers, and offerings. The enormous figures might have represented the animals that symbolized specific gods or natural forces. For example, the spider could be connected to rainfall and fertility. The monkey, found in tropical areas, may have symbolized distant water sources. The hummingbird might have represented a messenger deity. These connections weren't arbitrary. They reflected the Nazca's intimate awareness of patterns in nature, patterns that could mean the difference between harvest and famine. A key detail supporting this theory lies in the engineering. The lines are shallow, around 4 to 6 inches deep, yet they remain perfectly visible from the air because the pale sand beneath contrasts sharply with the darker stones on the surface. Creating these shapes didn't require advanced tools or machinery. A group of workers with ropes, stakes, and basic measurement techniques could create straight lines hundreds of feet long. Experimentation has proven that ancient cultures were fully capable of designing geoglyphs of this scale with simple tools and a clear plan. The feasibility makes the theory appealing. It paints the lines as a monumental extension of rituals the Nazca already practiced. Yet, there's a problem. The lines can't be recognized from the ground. If they were built for ritual processions, the participants would have had no idea what they were walking on. They could follow the trenches, but they would never see the figures themselves. Why create massive animal shapes if no one standing on the ground could understand them? Even in a society steeped in symbolism, the mismatch between effort and visibility feels strange. Some archaeologists argue that perspective wasn't the point. The act of creating the lines mattered more than the ability to view them. The labor itself could have been the offering. Others suggest that the figures were conceptual rather than visual, symbols intended for the gods, not the people. In that sense, the figure's visibility from above might not have been a flaw, but a feature, a way of positioning messages toward divine eyes rather than human ones. Still, the scale seems excessive. Dozens of figures, hundreds of lines, enormous trapezoids aligned with astronomical precision. The sheer scope requires coordination at a level that feels disproportionate to the Nazca's size and resources, especially during times of environmental collapse. The commitment of labor, time, and energy to projects that offered no clear earthly reward raises questions about what pushed them to continue, and what they feared might happen if they didn't. Even more unsettling are the geoglyphs created in the Nazca culture's final years. These late designs lack the symmetry and planning of earlier lines. They appear rushed, larger than before, and often overlap older figures. If the lines were ritual offerings, then these final drawings suggest desperation, a civilization trying to communicate something urgent, something critical, with the earth itself. The shift in style hints at anxiety, instability, and possibly a belief that prior messages had gone unheard. And if these rituals were meant to connect the Nazca with their gods, then we're left with a quiet question. Why did the lines keep multiplying long after the rituals stopped working? Another long-standing explanation is that the Nazca Lines were part of a massive astronomical calendar, a way to track solstices, equinoxes, and seasonal shifts essential to farming. Some researchers, including early pioneers like Maria Reich, spent decades measuring alignments between the lines and the sun's movements. She believed the shapes were a sophisticated system for predicting rainfall and guiding agricultural cycles through celestial events. To her, the desert was less a blank plain and more a sprawling observatory, one built on a scale that was impossible to appreciate without altitude. Several lines align closely with sunrise or sunset on solstices. Others point towards significant mountain peaks or the rising positions of stars that were important to ancient cultures across the Andes. The geometric shapes, especially the long trapezoids, could have functioned as ceremonial observation platforms. Their angles match the paths of celestial objects across the sky. If this is true, the Nazca weren't just artists. They were astronomers deeply attuned to the movements of the heavens. Their livelihood depended on understanding seasonal shifts, and the night sky would have been a constant presence in their world, a map as familiar to them as the desert floor. The idea gained support from the precision of the straight lines. Some stretch for miles without deviation. Others intersect at angles that mirror astronomical paths. These features suggest intentionality, a mapping system that might have helped predict seasonal weather shifts long before written calendars existed. If the Nazca built irrigation systems that still function today, it isn't far-fetched to imagine them building an environmental calendar of similar sophistication. But there are problems with this theory as well. Many alignments appear coincidental. Out of thousands of lines, some will inevitably point toward astronomical events purely by chance. Later, more rigorous studies found that only a small percentage of the lines match solstice or equinox positions. And even those matches aren't perfect. They're approximate and inconsistent. If the lines were meant to predict the movements of the sun or stars, the precision should be tighter. Then there are the figures themselves. The hummingbird, spider, monkey, and other animal shapes don't appear to serve any astronomical function. They don't align with specific star formations. They don't track seasonal changes. They're more symbolic than scientific. The contrast between the strict geometry of the lines and the organic shapes of the figures makes the system feel fragmented, like pieces from two different puzzles laid next to each other. Yet, the most unsettling detail comes from the trapezoids. Researchers studying the orientation of these shapes noticed something strange. Many of them don't align with the sky at all. They align with the horizon, pointing toward distant mountain ranges. And in the Nazca culture, mountains weren't just landscape features. They were sacred, believed to house powerful spirits and ancient forces. The horizon line would have carried its own significance, marking the boundary between the world of the living and the domain of divine beings. Some of these trapezoids run directly toward peaks associated with creation myths. Others follow the paths of underground water channels. A few point into the desert with no geological or astronomical explanation whatsoever, as if meant to track something unseen. The lengths vary dramatically, and some widen at the end like open corridors, an architecture that feels deliberate but defies simple interpretation. If the lines were an astronomical map, they're incomplete. Missing data, missing patterns, missing a final key. The alignments don't form a unified system. They hint at intention without revealing its full shape. Some archaeologists now wonder whether the Nazca weren't tracking the sky at all, but something else. Something they believed moved across the horizon, not the heavens. A presence that didn't follow star paths or solar cycles, but traveled low and slow across the desert. Something they could only outline with long, widening channels carved into the earth. And that question leads directly into the most unnerving theory of all. One many researchers refuse to take seriously in public, but never completely dismiss in private. Because if the lines were signals, who were they meant for? There is a third theory, the one whispered around edges of the research community, the one that surfaces in documentaries and late-night conversations. It suggests that the Nazca Lines were never meant for human eyes at all. This idea doesn't circulate in academic papers or lectures. It circulates in pauses, in careful glances, in the quiet acknowledgement that the lines don't behave like anything a desert culture should have left behind. The desert is flat, open, and impossibly dry. Ideal conditions for preserving messages over thousands of years. And the figures are enormous, perfectly visible from above. Long before aircraft, satellites, or drones, someone carved shapes designed to be read from the sky. The sheer scale feels intentional, almost strategic, as if the message needed to be unmistakable to whatever passed overhead. Some believe that the Nazca weren't just creating symbols for their gods. They were responding to something they witnessed, something that moved overhead, something they believed was watching. These theories point to the sudden shifts in Nazca art, the abrupt appearance of certain motifs, and the consistent upward orientation of some figures. To them, it wasn't reverence. It was communication. The humanoid geoglyph, often called the astronaut, is one of the most striking figures in the desert. The wide, circular eyes, the raised arm pointing toward the sky, the stylized body with proportions that don't match any known animal or spirit in Nazca mythology. Its presence feels intentional, deliberate, a message about a being that stood apart from the others. The fact that it's carved on the side of a steep hillside, facing outward, only deepens the impression that it was meant to be seen from above, or by something approaching from that direction. There are also the long, straight runways, shapes that resemble landing strips more than ceremonial paths. They stretch across the plains in parallel lines, some with cleared rectangular spaces at their ends. No known ritual required formations like these. No agricultural or astronomical system explains them. Their purpose remains uncomfortably unclear. The resemblance to modern airstrips isn't perfect, but it's close enough to raise eyebrows, especially when those strips widen into broad, flat zones devoid of stones, as if intentionally cleared. And then there's the timing. In the final centuries of the Nazca culture, environmental collapse struck the region. Severe droughts, failing crops, and internal instability pushed the society to the brink. During this crisis, the people doubled down on creating geoglyphs, but the designs changed. They grew larger, cruder, more urgent. Some appeared deliberately pointed outward, toward the sky rather than the horizon. It's a shift that doesn't match religious evolution or cultural drift. It looks abrupt, almost reactive. It's as if someone was trying to send a message during a disaster they couldn't escape. Some fringe theorists believe the Nazca were marking landing zones, signaling routes, or honoring visitors who came from above. Others say the lines were warnings, boundaries meant to mark where something descended before. A few go even further, claiming the geoglyphs represent what the Nazca saw in the sky. Creatures, movements, and patterns they didn't understand, but tried to outline on the earth before the memory faded. These claims are speculative, but they persist because the shapes themselves feel too deliberate to dismiss. The silence of the desert only adds to the unease. The lines have remained untouched for centuries, as if waiting for their intended audience to return. Even now, with satellites capturing images from orbit and aircraft flying overhead daily, the geoglyphs remain perfectly preserved, as though protected. The environment shouldn't be this forgiving, yet the lines stay crisp, clean, and eerily intact. Some archaeologists dismiss all of this openly, but in private, a few admit the same thing. The Nazca created signs far too large to see, with precision far too perfect to ignore, directed toward something they believed was not of this world. They don't commit to extraterrestrial explanations, but they acknowledge the oddity, the overwhelming sense that the Nazca were communicating upward, not outward. And if that's true, then the desert isn't just a graveyard of ancient art. It's a message left for someone, or something, that hasn't shown itself in a very, very long time. Thank you for joining us on this episode of 3 Theories. The Nazca Lines remain one of the world's most enduring mysteries, carved into the earth by a vanished people with no written explanation, no recorded purpose, and no clear audience. Were they ritual offerings meant to reach gods who controlled rain and life in the desert? Were they vast astronomical markers used to track the movements of the heavens? Or were they signs, signals, or warnings meant for something above. Something the Nazca believed would someday return. What do you believe? Visit 3theoriespodcast.com for resources, documents, and additional reading to help you form your own conclusions. Share your thoughts with us on social media and join the conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Join us next time as we investigate another haunting case and present 3 more theories for you to consider. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.